Hello everyone, welcome to Sinusoidal Music. This is Ruben here, and we have with us today Blackstratblues, aka Warren Mendonsa. Warren Mendonsa is the premier most name in Indian guitar. He has one of the biggest Indian independent acts, Blackstratblues, and along with that, he's an accomplished session guitarist in the Indian film industry. He's had several independent music albums, starting from Shining Karma back in 2007 to his latest Hindsight is 2020, which was released in 2021. It's a great pleasure to have you here, Warren.
Thanks for having me. Lovely to be here.
I guess I'll start with a cheesy question. What are you listening to right now, Warren?
Whatever my daughter wants to play in the car. I've gone back to listening to the Beatles just because it's been a while since I've done the entire album kind of thing. So
Right.
I'm making my way through in chronological order and a bit of Michael Landau, Derek Trucks. I think I've kind of gone to the tried and tested because there's always a time to go back and revisit the music that you love. That's part of you. So yeah.
You keep citing the Beatles, of course, and their rich harmonic history, composition, their cultural contributions which are present in your music. But I think one thing about you, which anybody who has heard you, I mean, they of course hear the blues influences, but even your modern rock roots, like let's say, I mean, you cover everything harmonically from Pink Floyd to let's say Led Zeppelin to modern stuff. Alice in Chains, which you used to cover with Zero. How has it been over the years? Like you have imbibed all these different musical influences.
I don't really do it consciously because a lot of what I listen to it just seeps under. And then very often, like I'll hear things that I've played, and then listening back, I'll be, oh, that's where I got that from. There's like a lick in the PSP solo, for example, like which I played with Zero. And I was recently listening to Van Halen, I think Pound Cake. There was that lick that came. I was like, oh, that's where I got it from. Just
Okay.
like a little two
Right.
seconds but I can tell, like, that's, and the thing is, while I'm playing it, I won't really notice. I like the best playing happens when I detach from it, so I'm not really thinking about it too much, not really
Right.
consciously, and then
Right.
all the stuff that I've listened to, it kind of gets mixed in somewhere and just comes out.
Yeah, one thing I used to do was listen to your bootleg recordings
Oh
and
yeah.
which are awesome, right? I mean, I just wanted to hear you improvise, very frankly, in whatever songs of yours.
There's
Yeah.
actually two live albums that you can listen to because
Yeah,
there's
of
a
course. Yeah, yeah.
improv. And I was finally, like, happy to put that out because over the years I was like, it'll be nice to do a live album. And then I had some time and I went through the archives and I was like, oh, there's a fair amount of stuff that I can actually, just polish it up in a mix and then put it out.
Yeah, I mean those two albums, I love those albums as well. I mean, yeah, the first thing I when I attended your gigs was like I want like a recording of this, and you fulfilled our wishes there. I was
Yeah.
reading one of your interviews. I mean, you're of course a producer yourself, and you produced artists like Tajtar, Junaid, and so on.
I haven't produced
Um,
Taj. He's just a
oh,
good friend of.
okay, okay, okay. Yeah, with respect to your favorite recording engineers and producers, and you had even mentioned that you like reading biographies of recording engineers. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Always find some cool stories of what happened behind the scenes. I liked Jeff Emmerich's book. He recorded the Beatles from the Revolver album onwards, and you can kind of hear a sudden, like, a leap in their recording techniques. And there was another engineer called Ken Scott who worked on the White Album, and he also worked with David Bowie and a bunch of other artists. So I liked reading his book. In terms of like just production, you're like, a good sounding album, it just grabs you, and also it sounds great on anything that you play it on. Like you put on a Steely Dan album, which Roger Nichols had worked on, and you can just hear it. I mean, there's so much care taken about how things were recorded, and the way everything sits. That's the main thing, because you can record an instrument to sound great by itself, but then to get it to work in context of the song and the arrangement and the production, those you need a little bit of experience to have that together. And that's what I've come to appreciate, just listening to the same recording over and over again, like the Beatles, for example. You just stop listening to it as a song as such, and then you hear deeper things into
Right.
it. So that's kind of when you can appreciate like a well recorded song.
Right, indeed. Yeah, your guitar tone is, of course, one of my favorite guitar tones, of course. You're a big gear head, as your fans might know. And I remember your gig in Humming Tree, where I think something went wrong with the amps or something, and you went and just changed it at that point itself. So, yeah, it must have blown. Yeah. So
Yeah.
and you did your engineering as well, right? You
Well,
yeah, which
I didn't complete my degree. I did
right,
3 years of engineering college and then I got a job in the recording studio for
right.
5 months.
How do you approach it? Composition versus the technical aspect of it, the recording aspect of it.
The composition comes first, obviously. So you're thinking as a songwriter. Then the next thing would, I guess, be to be a arranger, and see how the song progresses, what are the different layers that go into it. And then you kind of also double up as a recording engineer, as in, like, I've been like playing guitar and hitting record at the same time, that sort of thing. So in that sense, it can get a bit tricky, but luckily I've been used to working with, like, especially for my guitar, like I have a template, like the way things work. So there's very little time involved where I have an idea and I have to hit record and record it. So even if I can record a very rough, just a basic idea, the main thing is getting the inspiration down. So later on, you don't have to, oh, how did that go? That sort of thing. You can always polish it later and stuff like that. But very often, what would happen is, like, like, there are a few songs, like The Universe Has a Strange Sense of Humor and Aurora Borealis, where the rough guitar solo, because I had recorded it at a good enough quality, I was able to make that the final take, because I went back to, record it and never had the same spark or whatever the initial thing had. So in that sense, it's good to be able to capture those ideas in a very nascent stage. Because when we did North Star, I remember we did the first playthrough as such in a rehearsal room, and all we had was Jez, little Zoom, those portable recorders, and there was something really cool about that take, to the point where I went back and I learned that solo that I played, which I just improvised. And I learned it, like, I mean, I polished up a few little loose ends, but overall, what you hear on in that rough recording is pretty much what I played on the final thing. That kind of got me thinking, I should be able to, record that. So then for the next album, I remember we wrote a lot of it in the studio. The title track, When It's Time, that was recorded as we pretty much wrote it, because we finished earlier than we were supposed to. So we had 3 hours of studio time still left, and we were like, oh, do we just want to go home, or can we, use the time productively? And I had just a little snip, that the intro lick that you hear, that's all I had. So we went in and we just started jamming on it. Then I quickly wrote a chord chart, gave it to the other guys, and I think the second take is what ended up on the album. And then once that band playing together thing is down with its dynamics and arrangement and everything, then you can go and put on a few little, fairy dust overdubs. So I like working like that as well, because very often, sometimes, the first ideas or the first playthrough has a certain kind of magic which becomes hard to replicate later.
It's also awesome to hear your stories, your recording stories, especially your early zero recordings stories for your recording of your first album.
The original lo-fi.
Yeah, right. Especially all how instead of a pop filter you would use your wardrobe and underwear and so on.
Not
So
me. It was Rajiv, the singer.
right, right,
Like,
right.
I read somewhere that you could use pantyhose or stockings
Okay,
to make a pop filter with a knitting ring. It's the
right,
same. And he's like, I don't have stockings, obviously, so I'm just going to use my chaddi. So he just put his chaddi in the that became the pop filter. We had to make
right.
it brighter later, because some of the treble
Mhm.
frequencies got lost by the chaddi.
Right. Okay, so that I mean that was back then, but and I suppose in studios you don't really get that opportunity. But any interesting stories with like session recordings or that kind of thing, similar stories where you
I mean, off the top of my head, there's, once, like, suppose you're sitting down with the band and we're just chilling, and then all the stories start coming out. You don't have to think too much about it. But I remember we had just finished the last analog generation recording, which went really well, because sometimes you can, come away from the studio feeling a bit unfulfilled and we didn't quite get it down the way we imagined it. But that recording, I think everything was really seamless. The studio sounded good, the room sounded good, the band played really well. We improvised a few jams that became songs on the album, so we were left feeling very happy. And just as we were about to finish packing up, we called the Ubers, to pick us up. And that studio was at the end of a really long lane, which would sometimes, like, anytime it would rain, that lane would start flooding and stuff like that. And I think this was during some festival. And the Ubers are waiting at the main road, and it was raining cats and dogs, and the people who lived on that lane were playing garba, and they said, no, you can't go right now, you'll have to wait till we finish playing garba and then you can let the cars in. So we had to like just stand in the rain with all our gear watching them dance. It's like very surreal feeling, like what exactly is going on here. But then anyway, so like you always think back like how smoothly that recording went and then how it ended with standing in the rain with your gear.
Right, and even your story of the riff, like taking on basically taking on influences from you used to stay at Dadar, right? And
Yeah.
yeah, you had composed the riff of I believe Folkish 3 with the Ganpati music. That's how you
Oh,
came up with the riff.
that was when I was living in Khar. There
Oh,
was
okay,
a
okay, okay.
Ganesh procession going down the road,
Right.
so I just recorded a snippet of that and I managed to chuck it into the song. So you can kind of hear them approaching and then leaving.
Okay, but to go from there, so
Hmm?
of course you to go from like that kind on that tangent. So there is Bollywood music, right? There is like so I remember in a long interview you had done so that a gentleman was in he was this was an American interview I believe. So he had mentioned that your the
Everybody
premier
loves music. That's the one you're
Ye-
talking about.
Yeah, I believe so. And he had mentioned that you are like popular name and so on. And you corrected him saying that I'm a popular name in Indian independent music. So I mean, in the past, of course, there was a bigger gap between what you call
Mhm.
independent music and mainstream film music. And that gap, I guess, is reducing over time. So, I mean, if I show your music to anyone, somebody who's not really acquainted with, independent music, they still love your stuff because there's basically that core musicality of it. So how do you see that? How do you see, you could say populist mainstream music and this kind of music blending in and yeah, that kind of thing.
Um, I mean, for me personally, like playing on the Bollywood stuff, they don't really, give you credit as such, and the people who listen also don't really care like who's playing guitar. They may appreciate the guitar part, but they don't really dig deep enough to find out who played on it. I mean, they may be few people, but generally that's not the norm. It's usually the singer that gets all the attention. Sometimes the singers get more attention than the people who wrote the song, which I think is bizarre, but whatever. In that sense, I don't really, even care, like if people know, if I've played on it or not. Like sometimes, like I was like reading through my CV the other day, and then I was like, well, I better update it. So I went on YouTube and I tried to find some songs that I'd played on. And then I was like, oh shit, like 300 million views or whatever, So those sort of things, they don't really even like occur to me to even like think about like past achievements. But when it comes to my own music, I do put a lot of myself into it. So predominantly the reason I do it is for self-expression, to get it off my chest. It's like a form of therapy. And what also amazes me, then other people also are able to, pick up on those emotions or those thoughts or whatever, and then relate to them in a way that makes them very connected to the music. And that is something I'm always very grateful for. So in that sense, that's the only thing like I can actually tangibly say, okay, that's what I care about in that sense. And you know, if you do something for yourself and you're able to, get other people also to appreciate that's an amazing thing.
Right. Continuing off on
Did I
that.
answer your question? No, sorry, I mean, I just must have
No,
been
no, no.
repetitive.
Of course, you did answer your question, but even continuing on that. So a lot of people who enter music. So you used to work in a government job, if I'm not mistaken, in New Zealand, right? After you finished
When
zero,
I
right?
when I just moved here, yeah, there was a year that I did that while I was settling down and stuff like that. And then I got a job in a recording studio. Always, I didn't it seems to transition that way. I'm doing something and then I get a job in a studio. And
Right. So I had two questions off of that. One is, so during that time, how were you doing it? Like, being in that thing, that non-musical thing,
yeah.
and, balancing your project stuff, like, how was it? Yeah.
I mean, I was always writing stuff, and then I would come home from work and put down a few ideas in that sense. But I wasn't really like feeling up to the task of, putting together an album as a work of, something to release or whatever. I would just record that stuff, and then suddenly I saw like, oh shit, I've stockpiled quite a few ideas. And at the time I was working at the studio, I made a few friends as well. And then they luckily agreed to help me out, especially this guy called Cole Goodley, who played drums on most of that album. And then I found it much easier, once I had someone else to bounce the ideas off, even hear something they play and react to it. Then it happened really quickly. I actually wrote Newness, the song Newness, about that, about like, balancing a day job with a creative pursuit. And that's one of the songs I'd written during that period when I was working full time. I mean, the more you do it on a daily basis, then the more it's almost like, the tap that's running on a daily basis, the water flows smoothly. But if you haven't used that tap in a while, then you may just have to like open it and let all the dirty water, and suddenly then you get a clean flow of water. So it's kind of, I would, say it's very similar to that.
So, as you mentioned, I mean, so now that, I mean, of course, you've been working in the music industry for quite some time. So there's, of course, your work which you put yourself into. And there's also the more, you could say, maybe the not so engaging parts of it. So how do you look towards that? When music itself, the work and the not so called work, like how do you see it as basically your expression, music as expression versus music as maybe the drudgery aspect of it, or
It's
yeah.
actually a little more easier if I haven't written it, because then I'm kind of very open to whatever the songwriter or the music director has in mind, and I just become like a tool for them to unleash their creativity and their ideas. And if they don't have any ideas and they want to leave it up to me to, see what I do best, that's cool as well, because then I have like an open canvas. I mean, I've got the chords and the basic arrangement, and very often I'll play off the vocal. I'll listen to how the singer is, singing it. Obviously, if they're singing a sad song, you don't want to like do some, fast, shreddy stuff. Unless they ask for it, then that's cool. But that's again someone else's creativity that then I can, relate to it and then say, okay, this is what I can contribute to it. So I don't really have a problem. The thing is, like, when you write it yourself, then you become a lot more attached to it. It's like, my friends' kids come over and all can play great with them. We'll have a good time, and then they go home to his house. Like, but my kid is like my kid, and her day-to-day thing is,
Right,
up
right.
to me. So then you're obviously more connected and more hands-on with that.
There was also this thing where I think at that point in time, your music basically caught on, like it was there in like YouTube, and it exploded over time. And but so how do you see promotion or marketing? I know you don't handle it directly, but how do you see that? How do you see upcoming artists putting their music out there?
Well, if you want to have a career doing it, then yeah, you better be, pretty hands-on with the promotion or outsource it to someone who can handle that sort of thing. Like when that first album was released, there was not no YouTube even, there was no Spotify, nothing. There was no Bandcamp also. So to, monetize it became tricky. So I just put it up on my website for download. And I said, well, if you feel like contributing something, then this is my PayPal account, and flick across whatever you want, whether it's a dollar or whatever. I remember one guy, he sent me $200, and I was like, wow. He's saying, no, I really like this album. So I said, boss, you've just got yourself a free album every time I release one for life. So I send it to him. Every time there's a new album, yo, bros, check it out. So I was kind of lucky because by the time that first album came out, I'd already been with Zero for a while. So at least the kids on the indie scene kind of knew who I was. But the funny thing is, like, when we played, like, say around 3 or 4 before COVID, a lot of kids, someone shouted out like PSP or something at a Blackstratblues gig, and most of the people didn't even know what that was. So I was like, oh, this is kind of strange. It's like it's a totally different audience or a generation that's now fans of Blackstratblues, and it's been very organic. It's a lot of it is word of mouth. So I just have the people who really care about the music to thank for them, telling their friends about it or whatever. It's almost like a little secret that okay, I'm going to tell you about this thing, check it out. So I don't know, man. I haven't been that guy who like chases, mainstream popularity. Things that you have to give up in order to be focused on that full time. Like, if you're like really famous, for example, you give up pretty much your public life. You go out in public, and I've seen
Right.
people, like, I've been playing with some artists, they don't really get a minute's privacy if they're like traveling. Everyone wants something from them, an autograph, and so I don't really know if I'm going to be comfortable living that kind of a life. On the other hand, I mean, it'll be nice to just put out music that you really enjoy making, and then have that be financially viable enough to just live off that without having to do other things to pay the bills. So there's a bit of a yin and yang. You have to find a balance somewhere. So you make sure your bills are paid, and if you are chasing that pop stardom, then yeah, that's the game you have to play. And I wouldn't say that it's mutually exclusive with making good music. You can do both, and I mean, if you look at the Beatles, for example, that's like the one of the
Right.
most popular bands ever, but they still made some great music that stands the test of time. So it's not impossible. It's just a little bit harder these days because there's so much music out there. You're competing with now decades of great music, not to mention whatever's being released these days. And now everything that ever has been recorded, or most of it rather, is available at the click of a button on your phone. It's a tap of your finger and everything's available. So, it is definitely a tricky game. I don't really have any advice apart from like, keep your wits about you. Don't let people take advantage of you. Know where your priorities lie. If you can't do it all by yourself, then find some people that can help you do it. You don't have to be like me that, does every stage of the process. I wouldn't say it's a bad time to be making music as well, because like in terms of technology, it's become so democratic now. You can download a
Yeah.
software on your phone and start making music.
I mean, yeah, Blackstratblues. So that's your tool of choice. But you recently, in your live videos, you were playing this Black SG, Gibson SG,
Uh-huh.
and also your Les Paul, which, if I'm not mistaken, was with your brother Zoran, right? So which one do you like and prefer, or out of the two, or what is their
No,
distinct characteristics?
he's got a Les Paul as well, but I've got a Gibson Les Paul, and I got the SG first. Actually, the first Gibson I actually ended up using a lot was this red 335. I can see it. It's like
Oh,
there.
okay.
So Gibson in India, they were very kind to me. So even though I wasn't endorsed by Fender ever, funnily enough, but I used a Strat predominantly. But there was also a lot of film work and session work where I could use that 335. So they were like, okay, cool, take it and make good use of it. Then I kind of got in on a bit of a Derek Trucks, sorry, one listening to a lot of that. I was like, man, I need a good SG to play, slide on, though I've never really sat and practiced like I should. But I wanted a black one for whatever reason.
Right.
So after, searching around a while, I found one at a good price. It came from Hong Kong. Then I was doing a session and that producer was kind of insistent, you need to play this on a Les Paul. And I was like, I mean, I'm sure I could do it on the SG and you wouldn't, notice. I was like, okay, whatever, at least for someone else's peace of mind. And it's always good to have a Les Paul. So I was like, okay. And I have played quite a few like over the years that didn't belong to me, but then I kind of knew like, okay, if that's the kind of quality I want, then you got to bite the bullet and pay the piper. Because generally I don't really buy very expensive guitars. I like mid-level guitars that have a decent resonant tone, and then I can do whatever I want to customize them. But in the case of those, like, buy once, cry once, bought a really good one, came from Japan, and I was really lucky because it happened to be a good one. And then for a while I went like crazy. Like most of the videos I was just playing that and having a good time. And I found like that guy was right. There is a certain sound it has that you can't really get on any other guitar. You can kind of get very close and you can do a bit of EQ and that sort of stuff, but there's a certain thing to a good Les Paul that over the years, like everything from like the Hotel California solo to Guns N' Roses to Led Zeppelin or whatever, there's a ton of Les Paul tones, like early Clapton, for example, with Cream. All that stuff I love, yeah. So, it's kind of already part of my DNA. And then when I got it, I was like, oh, okay, now I don't have to work as hard to get that sound. Otherwise, I could kind of get it from a Strat, but I'd have to, do a few things differently, and it wasn't ideal.
Right.
My daughter stuck the bottle label on the wall. You can see it behind.
I remember you were telling that lullabies, her lullabies influenced even in your song, her vocals were recorded, right? Yeah, you had incorporated.
Yeah, there's a song called Little Castles, I think. And I was using one of her percussion instruments, and then
Right.
she came in and saw me using it and she started crying. And then that crying leaked into the recording and it's still there. You can hear it at one point in the song where like the guitar stops and you can hear